The Professor's Yarn is a story that's embedded in Chapter 36 of Life on the Mississippi, a book that Twain wrote. Thinking about this story, it takes me back to my own youth, growing up on the Mississippi River, taking trips on the Delta Queen, and watching endless episodes of Brett Maverick as he talked and cheated his way across a gambling table. It's called The Professor's Yarn. It was in the early days. I wasn't a college professor then, just a humble-minded young land surveyor with the world to survey in case anybody wanted it done. I had a contract to survey a route for a great mining ditch in California, and I was on my way by sea, a month-long journey around the Cape and up along the west coast to South Africa. I avoided conversation with the other passengers in favor of reading and dreaming. There were 3 professional gamblers on board. They were rough, repulsive fellows. I never talked to any of them, yet I couldn't avoid them. They gambled on an upper deck stateroom every day and night, and I often caught glimpses of them through the door, which stood ajar to let out the surplus tobacco smoke and profanity. They were an evil and hateful presence. There was one other passenger who seemed determined to be friendly with me, and I couldn't get rid of him without hurting his feelings. Besides, there was something engaging in his countrified simplicity and his beaming good nature. The first time I saw this Mr. John Backus, he had the manner of a rancher or farmer from the backwoods of some western state, and it turned out he was exactly that, a cattle rancher from Ohio. He got to dropping alongside me every day after breakfast, and we took long promenades around the deck of the ship. In the course of time, I got to know everything about his business, his prospects, his family, his relatives, his politics, and despite my general inclination to keep private, he managed to get out of me everything I knew about my trade, my tribe, my purposes, my prospects, and myself. I said something about triangulation once, and he asked what it meant. I explained that it was a way of drawing a triangle on a map to locate yourself. After that, he quietly and inoffensively ignored my name and always called me Triangle. What an enthusiast he was in cattle. At the bare name of a bull or a cow, his eyes would light up and his eloquent tongue would turn itself loose. He knew all breeds, he loved all breeds, he caressed them all with his affectionate tongue. When I couldn't take the cattle talk anymore, I'd change the subject and he would listen politely, but all of the life would drain out of him on any topic but that of the bovine kind. One day he said, a little hesitantly,
Triangle, would you mind coming down to my stateroom a minute and have a little talk on a certain matter?
I went with him at once. As soon as we got there, he put his head out the door, glanced up and down the hall warily, then closed the door and locked it. He sat down on the sofa.
I'm going to make you a little proposition, and if it strikes you favorable, it'll be a good thing for both of us. Mind you, I'm only letting you see this because we've gotten to know each other, and I trust you like an old friend already. I've raked and scraped and saved a considerable many years, and everything I've got is right here.
He unlocked an old trunk, tumbled a chaos of shabby clothes aside, drew a short, stout bag into view for a moment, then buried it again and relocked the trunk. Dropping his voice to a cautious, low tone, he continued,
She's all there, around $10,000. Being as I'm a cattleman and you're a surveyor, this is my idea. I know, and you know, that all along a line that's being surveyed, there's little triangles of land that get missed, and they fall to the surveyor free gratis, for nothing. All you've got to do on your side is to survey in such a way that these free lands will fall on good, fat land. I'll stock 'em with cattle, in rolls of cash, and I plunk out your share of the dollars on a regular basis.
I was sorry to wither his bloomin' enthusiasm, but it couldn't be helped. I interrupted and said severely, "I'm not that kind of surveyor. Let's change the subject, Mr. Backus." It was pitiful to see his confusion and hear his awkward and shamefaced apologies. He didn't seem to have suspected that there was anything improper in his proposition, but when he saw my reaction, he appeared horrified. I hastened to console him and lead him on to forget his mishap in a conversation about cattle and butchering. As we went on deck, it happened luckily that we were in port at Acapulco and the crew was just beginning to hoist some cattle aboard in slings. Bacchus's melancholy vanished instantly, and with that the memory of his late mistake.
Now, look at that. If the folks back in Ohio could see cattle being moved like that, their eyes would just bug out of their heads.
All the passengers were on deck to look, even the gamblers. Apparently, the gamblers had overheard us talking, and they moved in close to listen. Bacchus seemed to know them all and began to regale them with his pet topic. They were asking him all sorts of questions about what kind of cows they were and how much they must weigh and all such like. As I moved away, I saw the conversation continued between the four men. Then it grew earnest and quiet. They started talking to him in hushed tones. Bacchus gradually pulled away, but the gamblers followed. I was uncomfortable, but as they passed by me, I heard Bacchus say, with a tone of persecuted annoyance,
"Why, it ain't any use, gentlemen. I weren't raised to gambling, and I ain't a-gonna risk it."
I felt relieved, assuring myself that his level head would protect him from those predators. But during the fortnight's run from Acapulco to San Francisco, I often saw the gamblers talking earnestly with Bacchus. Once I threw out a general warning to him, but he chuckled comfortably and said,
"Yes, they tag around me, waiting to play a little just for amusement, they say. But if my folks have told me once to look out for that sort of livestock, they've told me 1,000 times, I reckon."
Soon we were approaching San Francisco. It was an ugly black night with a strong wind blowing. I was on deck, alone. Toward 10, I started below and I saw Bacchus coming out from the gambler's den. I flew down the companionway, looked around for him, couldn't find him, then returned to the deck just in time to catch a glimpse of him as he re-entered that confounded nest of rascality. Had he yielded at last? I feared it. Had he gone down below for his bag of cash? I drew near the door, full of foreboding. It was open a crack, and I glanced in and saw a sight that made me bitterly wish I had given my attention to saving my poor cattleman friend instead of reading and dreaming my foolish time away. He was gambling. Worse still, he was being plied with champagne and was already showing some effects from it. He praised the cider, as he called it, and said it was so good he almost believed he would drink it, even if it was spirits. Surreptitious looks passed from one rascal to another, and they filled all the glasses. And while Bacchus honestly drained his to the bottom, they pretended to do the same, but threw the wine over their shoulders. I couldn't bear to watch, so I wandered forward and tried to interest myself in the sea and the voices of the wind. But my uneasy spirit kept dragging me back at quarter-hour intervals. Through the night I watched the same scene over and over again. Bacchus drinking his wine and the others throwing theirs away. The only hope I had was that we'd reach our anchorage quickly, and that'd break up the game. I helped the ship along all I could with my prayers, and finally we went booming through the Golden Gate. Back at the gambler's den, there was small room for hope. Bacchus's eyes were heavy and bloodshot. His sweaty face was crimson, his speech maudlin and thick. His body sawed drunkenly with the weaving motion of the ship. The cards were dealt, and Bacchus took his hand and glanced at it, and his dull eyes lit up for a moment. The gambler saw it and got ready to move in for the kill. "How many cards?" the dealer asked.
"None,"
said Bacchus. The villains each took a card or two, and the betting began. So far the bets had been $1 or $2, but Bacchus started off with a 10. Wiley hesitated a moment, then went $10 better. The other two threw up their hands. Bacchus went 20 better. Wiley said,
"I see that, and raise you 100.
Then he smiled and reached for the money.
"Let it alone,"
said Bacchus with drunken gravity.
"What? You mean to say you're going to cover it?" "Cover it? Well, I reckon I am, and lay another 100 on top of it, too."
He reached down inside his overcoat and produced the required sum. This went on for a bit longer. Bacchus, in a drunken frenzy to match everything that wolf came at him with, until $10,000 was laid on the table. Bacchus reached into his coat and tossed his golden shot bag into the pile. Wiley called, and the bet was made for every dime Bacchus had.
"What have you got?"
asked Bacchus.
"4 kings, you darn fool."
Wiley threw down his cards and surrounded the stakes with his arms.
"4 aces,"
thundered Bacchus, covering his man with a cocked revolver.
I'm a professional gambler myself, and I've been laying for you duffers for this whole voyage."
Down went the anchor, and the long trip was ended. Well, it's a sad world. One of the 3 gamblers was Bacchus's pal. It was he that dealt the fateful hands. According to an understanding with the 2 victims, he was supposed to give Bacchus 4 queens, but of course he had made other arrangements with Bacchus. A week later, I stumbled across Bacchus, dressed to the teeth, in Montgomery Street. As we were parting, he said cheerily,
"By the way, you needn't mind about that little surveying proposal. I don't really know anything about cattle except what I was able to pick up in a week's apprenticeship over in Jersey just before we sailed. My cattle enthusiasm has served its purpose, so I won't be needing it anymore. But thanks for help getting those boys set up for our little party."
And that is the end of the Professor's Yarn.